Something just killed my dog.
Something killed your dog?
My dog went flying through the air over the tree. I don't know how it did it.
Okay.
Deep in Bigfoot Territory, Episode 6. The 19th Century Wild Man Encounters. This is a Squatch Mafia documentary. In the annals of cryptozoology, the origins of Bigfoot often trace back to the Pacific Northwest. In this video we will research some of the earlier encounters, predating the well-known stories from places like Washington, Oregon and British Columbia. Long before the first white settlers heard of native legends of Bigfoot in the forests of the Pacific Northwest for the first time, tales of wild men seeped through the pages of early 19th century newspapers of the Southwest, weaving a chilling narrative that defied explanation. In these strange stories, buried within dusty 19th century archives, especially the early settlers of the South grappled with encounters of so-called wild men, and reported tales of mysterious figures in the forests and swamps of the southern wilderness. Let's look into some of these stories. Many believe that stories of Bigfoot originated in the Pacific Northwest. This is not precisely correct. Early settlers of the South reported encounters with strange Bigfoot-like monsters long before the first recorded sightings in Washington and Oregon. As they pushed their settlements deep into the woods, and their hunting parties even deeper, the early frontier people of the South often ran up against mysteries that defied explanation. One of the most bizarre involved a series of events surrounding a creature called the Wild Man by newspapers of the 1840s. One of the first detailed accounts was published in 1846 and repeated in newspapers across the nation. It told of sightings of a creature near Crowley's Ridge west of Memphis. The so-called wild man was said to be of gigantic stature, covered in hair, and eyewitnesses said that his track measured 22 inches, his toes were as long as a common man's fingers, and in height and weight, he was double the usual size. This was one of the first detailed accounts of the discovery of Bigfoot tracks in American history and came long before the first recorded sightings in the Pacific Northwest. Stories about the creature's appearance were carried in newspapers across the nation. Some reports say that the creature was first sighted in eastern Arkansas as early as 1834. A statement that indicates that now lost reports may have been made 12 years earlier than 1846. Other reports followed, with the second surge of news coverage taking place in 1851. The Vermont Watchman and State Journal reported on May 29 of that year that an expedition was about to leave Memphis to hunt for the wild man. The monster was said to be of gigantic size and covered with hair. The same newspaper followed with a page 1 account on June 5 of 1851. Quoting the Memphis Inquirer as its source for a report that the wild man had been seen chasing a herd of cattle. The newspaper article of the Vermont Watchman from 1851 has still survived to this day and is a remarkable piece of history of Bigfoot in North America. It reads as follows. A wild man of the woods. The Memphis Inquirer gives an account of a wild man recently discovered in Arkansas. It appears that during March last, Mr. Hamilton of Greene County, Arkansas, while out hunting with an acquaintance, observed a drove of cattle in a state of apparent alarm, evidently pursued by some dreaded enemy. Halting for the purpose, they discovered, as the animals fled by them, that they were followed by an animal bearing the unmistakable likeness of humanity. He was of gigantic stature, the body being covered with hair and the head with long locks of hair that fairly enveloped his neck and shoulders. The wildman, after looking at them deliberately for a short time, turned and ran away with great speed, leaping from 12 to 14 feet at a time. His footprints measured 13 inches each. This singular creature, the Inquirer says, has long been known traditionally in St. Francis, Greene, and Poinsett counties. Arkansas sportsmen and hunters having described him 17 years since. A planter indeed saw him very recently, but withheld this information lest he should not be credited, until the account of Mr. Hamilton and his friend placed the existence of the animal beyond cavil. A great deal of interest is felt in the matter, by the inhabitants of that region, and various conjectures have been ventured in regard to him. The most generally entertained idea appears to be that he was a survivor of the earthquake which desolated that region in 1811. Thrown helpless upon the wilderness by that disaster, it is probable that he grew up in his savage state, until he now bears only the outward resemblance of humanity. So well authenticated have now become the accounts of this creature, that an expedition is organizing in Memphis, by Colonel David C. Cross and Dr. Sullivan to scout for him. The expedition to search for the creature, organized by the local authorities Colonel David Cross and Dr. J. Sullivan, may well have been the first Bigfoot hunt in American history. No written details of the results of their search have yet been found, but certainly could exist. Another wave of accounts appeared in the nation's newspapers in 1856. On January 3rd of that year, the Pittsfield Sun reported, "A wild man, 7 feet high, is stated to be roaming through the Great Mississippi Bottom in Arkansas. Numerous travelers and hunters have asserted that they have seen him, but none have been able to get near enough to give particulars concerning the strange being." Not all accounts came from the swamps of eastern Arkansas. A fairly bizarre article appeared in May of 1856, reporting a sighting in April on the Upper Red River and noting that the creature had also been seen in northern Louisiana. According to this version, which appeared in the Wisconsin Patriot on May 10 of 1856, the wild man was spotted breaking the ice of a frozen lake. He was covered with hair of a brownish color and was described as being well muscled. A party of men from the region had gone into the wilderness on horseback to find the creature and decided to try to capture it. One man from this group had gone ahead of his comrades and decided to try to take the monster on his own. This was a bad idea. As soon as the wild man saw the horse and rider, he rushed frantically toward them, and in an instant dragged the hunter to the ground and tore him in a most dreadful manner, scratching out one of his eyes and injuring the other so much that his comrades despair of the recovery of his sight. Also, the wild man was biting large pieces of flesh out of his shoulder and other parts of his body. The wild man escaped as the hunter's friends set off in pursuit, joined by a party of Choctaw Indians that happened to be in the area. The chase led up into the Ouachita Mountains, then covered in snow from a particularly brutal winter, where the pursuers failed to capture their elusive prey. Stories of a gigantic hair-covered man-like creature are told in Arkansas to this day, notably in the Ouachita and Ozark Mountains and in the swamps of the Mississippi and Red Rivers. Another Bigfoot-like cryptid from the area, that has achieved some remarkable notoriety over the decades, comes from the small village of Falk, in the swamps of eastern Arkansas. The Falk monster, the star of the 1972 horror documentary, The Legend of Boggy Creek, is one of the most famous cryptids today. Stories of the Falk monster have been told in the swamps of eastern Arkansas since 1908. The monster was sighted through the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. The Falk monster made local headlines in 1971, as various families, who lived in the swamps outside of Falk, reported nocturnal attacks on their houses. The sightings continued until the late 70s. During this period the creature was blamed for missing livestock, the killing of dogs and the attacks on several people. In the 90s also some rare sightings were reported from the Falk area. The 1972 movie, The Legend of Boggy Creek, shot at the original encounter locations outside of Falk, features interviews with various local residents and eyewitnesses. The creature is described as 7 foot tall, completely covered in reddish-brown hair and having a foul odor. Several locals from the town of Falk recall their stories, claiming that the creature has killed many large animals over the years. One farmer claims that the beast carried off 2 of his 100-pound hogs with little effort, leaping a fence with the animals tucked under its arm. Today the movie is one of the classics of Bigfoot-related cinema. Various sequels followed through the decades. You can watch the 1977 movie, Return to Boggy Creek, at the Sasquatch Mafia Patreon channel. Also a documentary on the Falk monster is coming soon to the Sasquatch Mafia YouTube channel. Today the area is still known for Bigfoot activity, with reports coming from the swamps of eastern Arkansas, the Ozark Mountains and the Ouachita National Forest. The North American Wood Ape Conservancy has one of their research sites in the Ouachita Mountains. Let's look at a short clip from 2012, recorded in the Ouachita National Forest. The video was allegedly recorded by 2 campers at Shady Lake, in the Ouachita National Forest, in summer of 2012. So, it appears that stories and eyewitness encounters are coming from the area since nearly 200 years, beginning in 1834. It seems obvious that all these stories, from the Wildman encounters of the 19th century, to the Falk monster and the legend of Boggy Creek, to the encounter stories of our days, depict the same kind of creature. It is remarkable how consistent and similar the descriptions of the so-called wild man in these early 19th century articles are. The wild men are consistently depicted as extremely tall and massive, covered in hair, possessing great strength, and leaving gigantic footprints. They are also described as highly aggressive and wild, posing a threat to both humans and farm animals. These descriptions remain consistent throughout early 19th century newspapers for over 3 decades. It is perplexing how many of these old articles can be found only from Arkansas and the Southwest. While tales of Bigfoot typically center on the Pacific Northwest, the wild man in these early stories from the Southwest presents an intriguing prelude and holds a special place in the folklore and history of Bigfoot in the United States. Hit the like button if you have enjoyed this video on the 19th century wild man encounters, deep in Bigfoot territory. Subscribe to the Squatch Mafia channel at YouTube for more videos on Bigfoot, Sasquatch, and cryptozoology. Join Squatch Mafia at Patreon for more Bigfoot documentaries and encounter videos. Thank you for squatching.